So today we're going to talk about polynomials, classifying, adding, and subtracting. In this video, we're only going to be talking about classifying, which is a fancy word for naming polynomials. And then during your Zoom session, we will talk about adding and subtracting. So first of all, what is a polynomial? A polynomial is an expression that's consisting of variables and coefficients that involves only addition, subtraction, multiplication, and non-negative integer exponents of variables. So kind of a lot in that sentence, so let's break it down. So we have variables and coefficients. So a variable is just a letter here, and a coefficient is the number in front. So if we are only allowed to use addition, subtraction, and multiplication, and we're trying to create a polynomial, an example here would be 2x to the third power plus 5x squared minus 3x plus 1. The next thing that we're going to talk about here is standard form of a polynomial. So what standard form means is that the terms are written in descending order of exponents. So what that means is we are writing highest exponent to lowest exponent working from left to right. So if we look at the polynomial written above, the highest exponent in the problem is 3, and they go down each time. 2, the invisible exponent with the x is just 1, and the invisible exponent with the number, which we call a constant, is 0. The reason we don't write x to the 0 is because anything to the 0 power is 1, and 1 times 1 would just be 1. Okay, so now let's work on actually naming these polynomial functions. So the name for something that has one term, for example, x, we would call that a monomial. Something that has two terms, like x plus 2, we would call a binomial. Something that has three terms, like x squared plus 2x plus 1, would be a trinomial. And those are something we're going to work a lot with this year. And anything that we call four or more terms, we just call it a polynomial, which means many, poly. And you can think of polynomials, so I'll give you an example. X to the third plus 2x squared plus 4x plus 1. It has 4 or more terms, so I could have made it 5 terms. I could have made it 10 terms. Polynomials, think of that like kind of like the cloud up here. And all these specific ones, 1 term, which is a monomial, 2 terms, which is a binomial, and 3 terms, which is a trinomial, are all underneath this cloud of a polynomial. The reason we don't have more specific names for ones that have 5 terms, 6 terms, we're not trying to remember things that have 10 terms with a specific name. So we just call them polynomials. But the ones with 1 term, 2 terms, and 3 terms, we have specific names, and they're right here. Okay, so now let's move on to some actual examples here, okay? But before we do that, we need to talk about the word degree. So the word degree in math means for a polynomial with one variable, the degree is the highest exponent. So degree we're looking for, fancy word for highest exponent. So we are looking for the highest exponent in the problem. If the highest exponent is 0, we say that the degree is constant. So a degree of 0, an example would be -3. You don't see any variable, which means the degree is 0. So we are saying that it's constant. Okay, so the next one, what if the degree is 1? If the degree is 1, we call it linear. And something that is linear would be like this example over here, The highest exponent in the problem is 1, so we call it linear. Now, if something has a highest exponent or a degree of 2, we call it quadratic. And an example of a quadratic would be here, since the highest exponent is 2. And then if something has a highest exponent of 3, we call it cubic. And you can see an example over here. The highest exponent is 3, so it's called cubic. And then last one you'll need to remember, if the highest exponent is 4, we call it quartic. Not to be confused with quadratic. So quartic, highest exponent is 4. If you think that's going to be something tough for you to remember, the difference between quadratic and quartic, one way that I remember quartic, I think of 4 quarters would be in a basketball game, 4 quarters make $1, quart 4. Okay, so now let's complete the chart right here. So standard form, again, means highest exponent to lowest exponent. Here there's only one term, so that's already in standard form. Degree means what's the highest exponent? The highest exponent here is 2. Oops. Classification by degree. So I look at my chart up here. If my degree is 2, we call it quadratic. Now I need to do classification by number of terms. So that was my first table. Or not first table, first part up here. So how many terms do I have? Looks like I don't have any addition and subtraction, so I just have one term. That's all grouped together. If it's one term, we call it a monomial. This next one, we look, is it in standard form, meaning highest exponent to lowest exponent? Yes, it is, so we can just rewrite it. It's already in standard form. Goes 2, 1, 0. What's the highest exponent? Again, we see it's 2, so the degree is 2. Therefore, the classification by degree is again quadratic, but now this time we don't have one term. We have 1, 2, 3 terms. Something that is 3 terms we call a trinomial. My next one here, standard form, it's already in standard form, highest exponent to lowest exponent. The highest exponent or degree is 3. Something that has a degree of 3 we call a cubic. And how many terms? It looks like we only have that one addition sign, so we have 1, 2 terms. And something that is 2 terms we call a binomial. Next one. So we already kind of talked about this. This is called a constant. What's the invisible exponent there? It's actually x to the 0. So we're going from 0 to 1, which would not be in standard form because we need to go from highest exponent on the left to the lowest one on the right. So the actual standard form here would be negative 3x plus 1. You don't need to write the x to the 0. So the highest exponent here is 1. If the highest exponent is 1, we call it linear. And how many terms? This is 1, 2 terms. So again, we call it a binomial. And last, this one is not in order from highest exponent to lowest exponent, so it's not in standard form. We have a 4 exponent here, an invisible 1 here, and a 0 here. So we need to rewrite that. The 4 exponent needs to be first, the 1 is the next highest, and the 0 is last. So what's the highest exponent? It is 4. What do we call something that has a 4 as the highest exponent? We say it's quartic. And how many terms is this? 1, 2, 3. So we call it a trinomial. So this would be called a quartic trinomial. Okay, that is it for today's video.